was the England-Greece game, World Cup qualifier for 2002. A draw, we just needed to avoid defeat to qualify for the World Cup. We got that free kick, 25 yards out. David Beckham, who was captain, golden balls himself, took it 25 yards out, the whole ground. I just remember the tension, the nervousness. He had to score, or there was every chance that England weren't going to qualify for the World Cup. And sure enough, he bent it over the wall, top left-hand corner, goal, and England qualified for the World Cup. And I just remember me and Dan were jumping up and down while he was trying to commentate, sort of bouncing around, arms around each other. And I was still quite new to the media, and I was still aware while I was doing this, I shouldn't be doing this. It's unprofessional. And I remember I just turned around and I saw Alan Green, who was doing the Five Live famous commentary, bouncing around with the pundit, whoever it was, I can't remember, maybe Terry Butcher or something, jumping around. I thought, oh, it's fine.
Hello and welcome back to Season 3, Episode 1 of When Football Began Again, the podcast that looks at the Premier League era through rose-tinted spectacles and tries to remember the good times. Today's show is a deserted island matches special with Jules Warren, Sky Sports broadcaster, absolute gentleman, massive Everton fan. All of that coming up very shortly. Before we get there, though, a huge thank you to everybody who has supported the show during what was a little bit of an elongated break, a little bit of life happening in the middle there. I've been away a little bit longer than originally anticipated, but the show is back. We'll be back every single week now, right up until the eve of Euro 2024. I've got some phenomenal guests lined up for you. I have got Jim White, the journalist and author. I've got Jason Lee talking all about his career in the 90s with Nottingham Forest and the massive impact that the Deal and Skinner sketches had on him. I've got an episode that reimagines what some of the most memorable moments of football history would have been like. And in our season by season roundups, we also close out the 90s. So much to come in the next few weeks. As ever, all of the description in the show, you'll find all the links you need to all the social channels, how to support the show. Any shares and reviews are much appreciated as always. But let's get into it. Jules Warren. This was actually recorded last summer on the eve of the new season. I've had to sit on this one a little bit longer than most. So Everton hadn't actually received a points deduction at that point, and to all intents and purposes, we were thinking that it was going to be their final season at Goodison Park, which we now know is not to be the case as well. Other than that, there's a lot of Jules making a few predictions, which turn out to be quite accurate actually, and hoping for a slightly less stressful season as an Everton fan. Not so much. Sorry about that, Jules. So let's crack on. Jules Warren, deserted island matches. Enjoy. Joining me today to discuss his career in football and some of his most memorable matches, it's one of Sky Sports' most familiar faces, Jules Warren. Jules, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm very well, Carl. I'm in disguise, glasses today, so not instantly recognisable from the box, but I'm very well. It's been a long time since I saw you, so good to see you again.
Yeah, absolutely. The Clark Kent of Sky Sports. I love it.
Pants on the outside under the desk as well, yeah.
Let's start with your football allegiances. I mean, you are a consummate professional, but eagle-eyed viewers will spot every now and again there's a reference towards your allegiances. You're an Everton fan, aren't you? How did you become an Everton fan? When was your first game?
Yeah, I'm a bit more open about it nowadays. When I first started at Sky, I was sort of very reluctant to admit who I supported, just in case it got me into trouble. But I think, actually, as I've been there longer, I felt more confident in saying who I support. I don't know why though, because we're rubbish most of the time. So I grew up supporting Everton in the mid-'80s, which ages me somewhat. I grew up on the Wirral, where you were either a red or a blue, or some Tranmere fans as well, of course, but mainly red and blue amongst my mates at school. So it was mid-'80s, so we were one of the most successful teams in the country, winning everything, FA Cups and league titles in '87 and elsewhere, and European trophies as well. And I went blue. Most of my mates went red, including my best mate, who was a big Liverpool fan. But I went down the blue route, and I've been paying for it ever since.
Your first game was seeing some of those great teams in the mid-'80s, was it?
Yeah, I mean, my first real memory of watching Everton was the '86 Cup final. So I'd have been 7 or something like that when we played Liverpool, big Merseyside derby, and we took the lead. Gary Lineker scoring, and I was watching it around with my best mate who was a Liverpool fan. His dad was a Blue. My dad was a Blue because of me, so he'd started supporting Everton as well. So there were 3 Evertonians, 1 Liverpool. My mate had a sulk. He went to the other room where they had a second telly and refused to watch it with us. And of course, they turned it around and they won it. And he was dancing around the lounge. And, that's when I've got my first taste of what Liverpool fans could be like, rubbing it in our faces. So that's my first real memory. And I started going to Goodison, I think, actually, proper glory hunter. The year we won the league in '87, my dad started taking me to a couple of games then when it fitted in with his work. That was where it all started for me. So, 87, I think, was the first time I ever went to watch an Everton game. And I think, from memory, we just clinched the title, actually. It was the final game of the season. I went to see that against Spurs, I think. And that was it. Yeah, and where are we now? So that was 87, many, many years on. Still going strong.
Yes. Yeah. Well, before we begin selecting matches, a lot of them with an Everton theme for your deserted island, let's cover a bit about your career path to Sky Sports. You and I first met back in your radio days at Hallam FM in Sheffield. You presented the sports show every Saturday. How early did you know that a career in sports broadcasting, sports journalism was for you? And how did you make those first steps?
I think it went back to sixth form. I think I started doing a bit of hospital radio. A mate worked there and he took me down to show me around. I quite liked it. It was a bit of a buzz being in a studio, even though it was only broadcasting to a few wards on the hospital. But that sort of gave me the taste for it. And then went to university, started doing some student radio. Actually did a bit of a Saturday sports show there, which probably set the tone for me and the way my career was going to go. And then went and did a postgraduate diploma in broadcast journalism after my main degree. And that was where it all really happened. I was basically went from doing an English degree when I did 6 hours a week to a broadcasting postgrad for 1 year, which was sort of a full, intensive 5-day-a-week job, effectively learning the trade and the radio studios, TV studios. And I just absolutely loved it. And we used to have visiting news editors who'd come in. We'd do like a news day, pretend we were a radio station or a TV company for the day, do broadcast, do bulletins, do programs. And one of the news editors that came in was working with me and spotted me, offered me a bit of work experience. And that led to my first job in Manchester on a radio station there called Key 103. That was my first ever radio job. Did a few years there, and then Hallam FM, where I met you, came up from Sheffield. They were a sister station to Key, and they asked me if I was interested in going to be the head of sport there. Because at Key, I was news and sport, but I knew I wanted to do sport. And took the job there and had 4 or 5 really, really happy years there. Met my wife, and actually I'd been at university in Sheffield, so it was a great place for me to go back to and live. And there were some great times, weren't there, Hallam? The Saturday Sports Show Game On, we had a really good team. It was pretty full on, but it was a great way to sort of learn my trade, and it certainly was a great platform for me to go to Sky many years later.
That's it, yeah. The goal updates during a Rihanna song or whatever it might be, and then and 2 Sheffield clubs, Rotherham, Barnsley, Doncaster as well. It was a hotbed, isn't it? So the first match to pick for your deserted island is a Premier League game featuring Everton. What would you go for?
I mean, I had a long think about this, and there's a sort of correlation to the season I've just endured that's just gone by when we stayed up on the final day. So I've gone back to 1994. Which was the first of the 3 close shaves, really close shaves we had on the final day of losing our top flight status for the first time in decades. So 1994, final day of the season, lots of permutations as to whether we'd stay up or go down, which hadn't happened in my first 25 years of supporting Everton. On that day, we were playing Wimbledon, and I was actually I was musical at that stage in the youth orchestra, Merseyside Youth Orchestra. My dad was the conductor because that was his background. He was a classical musician. And we had a big rehearsal for a concert that night in the Philharmonic Hall in Liverpool. But this game was on, this huge game. So like 80 kids in rehearsing for this concert, and lots of Everton and Liverpool fans, but a lot of Everton fans, rather have been watching the game or at the game, but couldn't be because they had to be at this rehearsal. So my dad had given the timpani, the drum player, permission to have a headset on and listen to the commentary. So 2-0 down, he's just shaking his head and he's looking dejected, and word comes to... Bear in mind, this is 94, so it wasn't the day of mobile phones and stuff. So he just literally had one radio commentary, and we were 2-0 down, and it looked like we were doomed. We were going down, dejected. It was pretty miserable. Then halfway through a rehearsal piece, bang, he banged his drum. Totally out of play. I was like, 2-1. Oh, great. Okay, I think it was Graham Stewart scored a penalty. So it's 2-1 at half time. Into the second half, bang, drum again goes. It turns out it was Barry Horn scoring this worldie to make it 2-2. And so we're into the last 10 minutes of the game, and obviously we still need a goal, I think, at that point. And Graham Stewart played a famous 1-2 with Tony Cottee, scored, and he went bang on his drums like that. And we turned it around. It was brilliant. Everyone was celebrating and stuff. So it was just a really, really good memory of being in that rehearsal situation and seeing us. It was just a really special day, And we stayed up, and obviously we did it again in '98. We did it again this season. We somehow keep living a rather lucky life, but I'm hoping it won't be fourth time unlucky next season.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to trust anyone with the commentary, the drum player is going to be someone who's going to be able to let everyone else know. But
wouldn't have been quite the same impact if it had been the triangle player, would it?
or the horn section for Barry Horn, of course. That would have been also.
Good point. Good point. Yeah. Very good.
So from Hallam FM, you moved on to Sky Sports, where you quickly established yourself as one of the channel's main faces, often deputising for the legend that is Jeff Stelling on Soccer Specials. Obviously, they're huge boots to fill, if I may say so. You do it brilliantly. What preparation goes into a big live show like that? And can you ever kind of feel fully prepared for live TV, or is that always that element of being on the edge of your seat? You don't know what's coming next.
Yeah, I think in live sport, in that environment, there's always that unpredictability. You never know what's going to happen. It is funny, the number of people that I think have said to me in the past, what happens? What do you turn up about 6 o'clock and you just go on and read auto cue, do? And you're like, no, a show like that, for a start, you don't know what's going to happen in 90 minutes of football. And it's pretty much unscripted from the minute we go on air. There's a little bit at the top that I might have written, but largely it's just a blank camera and off you go with your guest and your reporters out at the ground. For an average Tuesday night soccer special show, which is a busy, say, 40 matches that night, I'll probably have done a 10-hour day on Monday. Once I've dropped the kids at school, we'll be prepping all the way through the day, all the stats and research and reading articles and chatting to the producer on the phone about what our build-up will be focused on and what sort of talking points we want to get through. And then I'll get in on a Tuesday, midday maybe. And so there's sort of 6 or 7 hours of further work to do before we actually go on air at 7 o'clock. So there's a lot of prep goes into it because you've got to be prepared for it, whether it's a Premier League game or a Champions League game, or whether you're covering National League fixtures on the video printer or Scottish League One. It's my job to be across everything. I need to know what the permutations are, what the context is for each club, what the implications of a goal, what it means for the league table, what the main stories are. So you cannot ever be prepared enough. And I think the old mantra of prepare to fail, fail to prepare is always true. But there are the times when you plan, you think you're nicely prepped, and then you'll have a big storyboard break during a show like that, which you just can't be prepared for. Most recent case of that was last season when we got the sad news that came through literally 3 minutes before we went on air that Pele had passed away. And so, suddenly a 45-minute build-up you've got for a busy football show is totally out the window. You can't be doing all the chats you were going to. You have to report this very sad news and this very big news for the football world. And, the running order goes out the window. And then you have to start thinking about how you're going to get the tone right for a show where there's goals flying in. But football is mourning one of its greatest ever. So, you can never be prepared for what might happen. Those midweek nights can be full on. There's a lot going on. Guests in the studio normally gooning around a lot of the time, as they like to. Reporters at the ground, video printer, 3 or 4 different voices in my ear, feeding me stuff and telling me where we're going next and that sort of stuff. So you're spinning a lot of plates, is what I always talk about. And occasionally a few smashes to the floor, but most of it get through unscathed.
Yeah, holding it all together, absolutely.
Yeah.
The second game for you, Deserted Island, is a non-Premier League game. What would you go for?
So I had to think about this, and I think it's, I chose one of the games actually from probably our days at Hallam, Carl, when we were covering Sheffield United and Sheffield Wednesday, and it's the playoff final for Sheffield Wednesday when they faced Hartlepool. I think it was 2005, and it was at Cardiff at the Millennium Stadium because Wembley was being redone at the time. And we'd been there 2 years earlier with Sheffield United in the final, which went horribly wrong for the Blades. They were a goal down after 5 minutes. They lost 3-0. It was all over at half time. And so it was a pretty dejected journey back to South Yorkshire. So back 2 years later with Sheffield Wednesday, Paul Sturrock was the manager in those days. And we had Ron Atkinson as our pundit who we'd booked for the day. He was obviously a big character. And I remember having to go and meet him somewhere the other side of Cardiff, like half a mile walk from the ground. It was a boiling hot day. And I was sent, even though I was doing the commentary, I was head of sport, I suppose I decided myself to go and get him. So I went and met him, and walking back through the streets towards the stadium, Ron Atkinson, everyone knows Ron Atkinson. So all the Wednesday fans who were lying in the street saw him just started swarming round him. And I was walking, and he just kicked out. I'm going to keep walking. He was like the Pied Piper as he made his way towards the Millennium Stadium with a sea of Wednesday fans behind him singing songs and stuff. So it was a great atmosphere on the way there with Big Ron, who was the sort of character I thought he would be. And actually, we didn't do many commentaries on Hallam, as you could probably recall. So having a big name like that was great for a big final. And this one went a lot better than 2 years earlier. It did actually go to extra time. It was actually quite a nervy final, but they scored earlier in extra time Wednesday and again in the last minute of the game, and they won it 4-2. But yeah, that was a great day. And then the Wednesday fans that night in Cardiff, which is a great night out anyway, if you've been out there, and people in Cardiff will know that. It's a great night out anyway. The whole place just seemed to be taken over by Wednesday fans. It was absolutely bouncing. I think Ron was probably in the corner somewhere with a bottle of champagne, but I didn't see him. But yeah, that was memorable, just for the Pied Piper and Ron Atkinson leading the Wednesday fans through the streets of Cardiff. That was great.
I suppose that's the thing. If you're Ron Atkinson, you're used to being Ron Atkinson, so you're going to attract that crowd when you're a football fan.
Right. Yeah, he wasn't phased. I was the one that was more phased, but I can just picture he had his Louis Vuitton sort of man bag he had under his arm as well. Funny things that stay with you. I can't remember what happened yesterday, but I remember that quite vividly.
Amazing. Well, I mean, we're coming on to the next question. You've worked with some of the biggest names in the game, Ron Atkinson being one of them. I still actually remember you on a co-commentary down the line with Chris Waddle, and me being a Spurs fan, had the opportunity to say hello to Chris Waddle, and I think I just went to pieces because I don't think I chatted to an ex-Spurs player before. I mean, who are the kind of names that sometimes maybe you've interviewed that you sometimes have had to pinch yourself and go, wow? And are there any names that you'd love to have the opportunity to work with in the future?
I mean, I suppose you can think I've done a fair few sort of big name interviews, if you like. I remember in my radio days having to go and interview Sir Alex Ferguson, which was very intimidating. I didn't normally do the Manchester United interviews, but Dan Walker, who was the head of sport then, I couldn't do it for any reason. So I went to interview him, and that was, I mean, the aura that guy has. I was stood outside his office trembling, along with actually the journos who were all interviewed him most weeks. He just had that presence and that intimidating factor. So yeah, people like him. But I suppose for me, it's the Everton connection again. It's like you mentioned with Chris Waddle. Players like Barry Horn, Trevor Stephen, Graham Stewart, guys, some of our greatest players and who've scored some of the most important goals in our history. I mentioned Graham Stewart, keeping us up that year, and Barry Horn with the worldie. And suddenly you're sort of sharing a studio, and they're giving you their views and talking to you like you're a mate, and it's like, well, these are guys I used to go and watch at the games. And another one of those, Graham Sharp, one of our legendary strikers. He did quite a few soccer specials with me, and Tony Cottee. I remember being at Goodison for Tony's debut in 1988, and he scored a hat trick in his first game, and I was there as a 10-year-old boy, decked out in my Everton tracksuit with my old man, cheering his name. He's my new hero. And then 25 years later, you sat there in the studio, with Tony Cottee on a panel show that you're presenting, and so you talk about pinch yourself stuff. I mean, that's really special, actually. So yeah, I think it's probably people with the Everton connection that means the most to me. In terms of who I'd like to share a studio with, who could I say? It has to be another Everton legend, wouldn't it? Really. Big Dunc and Ferguson. I'd love to have Big Dunc in the studio sometime. Yeah, and he never did many interviews, did he? But I think he's done a few more now. I know he's a manager again these days. But yeah, Big Dunc. I'd like to have him on the panel one day.
The third game for your deserted island is your favourite non-Everton Premier League game. So any game from the Premier League era that you'd relive again, not featuring Everton.
So I thought, it's a bit obvious. I was going to go down the Aguero line, but I actually think a lot of people will say that one. So I thought of another game. Normally, when you think of a memorable game, it's got to be one which had goals in it. And this one had loads. It was actually a Manchester derby back in 2009. It finished Man United 4, Man City 3. And I guess because doing the job I do, you always love a story and a subplot and a narrative. And you had so many to this one. It was a Manchester derby, first of all. It was United City. And, of course, City were just starting to grow in stature, the noisy neighbours, all that sort of thing. And you had Carlos Tevez playing for Manchester City. He'd been at Man United for the last 2 years. There was talk, was he going to sign a permanent deal with United? He'd been on loan there. Sir Alex said he didn't answer the phone when he tried to pick him up. Tevez said he was never offered a permanent deal. So he went to Manchester City, inevitably in this derby, which was early in the season, scored against Manchester United. But then it was 3-3 heading into stoppage time. So Fergie time. And Man United won it with Michael Owen scoring the winner. Everyone was like, why is Michael Owen signed for Manchester United? He's a lad that came up through the Liverpool ranks. Obviously been off to Real Madrid and to Newcastle. But he came back and he scored the winner in a Manchester derby against the Manchester City side, including Carlos Tevez, that was on the rise. So it was 7 goals, loads of narrative, winner in Fergie time, classic Premier League game. I think Fergie said afterwards it was probably the best derby ever. I mean, I might have to argue that Everton 4, Liverpool 4 in the FA Cup many years ago tops that. But in terms of a Premier League game that doesn't involve my beloved Blues, it stands out, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think there's like quite an iconic image as well at the end of Mark Hughes like angrily pointing at his watch, like someone who's been on the right side of Fergie time in his playing career,
totally.
like just pointing out to the officials of just the injustice of it.
Yeah, there's another narrative. You see, it had absolutely everything.
Yeah, and I love a game like that where the camera's literally shaking. It's an important goal when you can see the camera shaking in the stadium.
Yeah, absolutely.
Coming back to Everton for a minute, the Toffees have been in the top flight uninterrupted now since 1954. A few short spells aside, either side of World War II, they've been a top flight club for their entire existence, obviously being a founder member of the Football League in 1888 as well. Despite this, and as you've touched upon, the last couple of seasons have seen them edge ever close to the relegation trapdoor. It was really quite a close run thing this season that's just passed as well. And as we come into what is presumably the final season at Goodison, what are your hopes for the future, and what do the club need to do differently to avoid a third consecutive season of real struggle?
Yeah, I really can't go through another year of that. The last two, having all those years of finishing 7th and wondering how we're going to break into the top 6, what I would give to be finishing 7th again, heading into this season. It's been a pretty miserable time to be an Everton fan, and you'll know, and all football fans will know. So much going off the pitch at Everton, and I think we know with all successful clubs, it's when boardrooms are settled and the club is being well run from top to bottom. But the fact is, we've got issues off the pitch with the ownership, with the boardroom, and the problem is, as long as that continues and there's that disconnect between the board and the fans, and the problems continue on the pitch, and that's the way it works. Farhad Mashiri, the owner, has now moved on to the board himself to try and take more control over things, which I don't think is going to appease the fans. And that's the thing. And so yet again, we go into a summer where we're all looking at the transfer market, wondering who are we going to sign? We've got to strengthen that squad that nearly went down. I think we're all scratching our heads wondering what's going to happen, So that stability at the moment doesn't look like it's there. And we've got this lovely new stadium being built, which I saw a couple of weeks ago. I was down there for a game and I went to have a quick look because I haven't had a chance to look. It looks amazing. It's going to be spectacular. And as you say, this is our final season at Goodison. And you want to wave off the old lady with a really good campaign. But at the moment, we're just wondering, well, is it going to be the same old? And we're going to be moving into a new stadium, in the Championship. So there's a lot of uncertainty. I personally, in Sean Dyche, we've got an experienced manager. I love Frank Lampard as a guy, as a football man. I really wanted it to work for him, but it just didn't. But I think in Sean Dyche, you've got a manager who knows his stuff. He's experienced. He's worked on the budget before. I hope he can, pull a few rabbits out of hats this summer. Not sure how much money we've got to spend. I just hope he can improve the squad so that we are, just a mid-table finish, just to make sure there's no flirting with relegation this season, because Everton fans cannot go through that again.
No, it's been a difficult couple of years. Hopefully, as you say, maybe a slightly more boring season, hopefully, for that final season.
I take boring, Carl. I take boring.
And the fourth match for you to take to your deserted island is a European match. You'd relive it again and again. So it could be a UEFA game. It could be a game, an overseas domestic game. What have you gone for?
Forgive me going back to an Everton game, but I've had to, because we haven't had many European campaigns in my lifetime. And in fact, this one is actually just before, as I said earlier, I started going to games and supporting them. But 1985, I've seen highlights and clips on YouTube over the years. 1985, we got to our first ever European final in the Cup Winners' Cup, which we won, beat Rapid Vienna in Rotterdam. But actually, it was the semi-final at Goodison, the second leg against the mighty Bayern Munich, who were the West German champions at the time, which goes down as one of the great games at Goodison Park. And it was 0-0 from the first leg, back to Goodison for the second leg. 50,000 were there. We were a goal down at half-time, and Howard Kendall apparently famously said to the players, "We're kicking towards the Gladys Street end. The fans will suck the ball in." And sure enough, they did 3 times. We completely turned it around in the second half. In fact, the goal we conceded was the first we conceded in the whole competition, getting through to that run to the semi-final. And then second half, Graham Sharp scores to level it. Andy Gray scores to put us in front. And then Trevor Stephen gets one just to put the icing on top of the cake. And you look at the scenes online or whatever at Goodison Park that night, particularly the Gladys Street, absolute limbs, as we say these days. Total crazy scenes behind the goal. And people who are there say that I've never known Goodison like it. The whole ground, you talk about the camera shaking, was absolutely rocking, and I think they thought it was about to fall down. I think we had a pretty close atmosphere last game of last season when we stayed up against Bournemouth, but that was just a really, really special night. Apparently, I just wish I'd been a fan then to go and see it. But and that was the year that we won the league, and we would have done the treble, an historic treble, but we lost the final game to Manchester United in the FA Cup final. So it was a great time to be an Everton fan, and that European campaign obviously was the piece, the icing on the top of the cake. And not many European Cup finals since then, unfortunately, in my time when I could actually remember it.
And these are the moments, I think, as well, with an old ground like Goodison, when you move away from an old ground.
Yeah.
Obviously the new stadium's going to be fantastic, and hopefully some European campaigns ahead. But actually, they're the nights that will live forever, I think, in the memory of any fan that was there. Won't it? It's an atmosphere unlike any other. Yeah,
it absolutely is, and you're right. It's particularly poignant when you think back to a night like that. So when we're about to wave farewell to this place that's been our home for 120 odd years or whatever it is, and it's been home to many memories and special occasions for me as well. But I'm realistic. We know how modern football is, and you cannot survive in a stadium in the Premier League with the size of Goodison Park, and you've got to have other revenue streams coming in, and you see the best teams have the best grounds. That's the way it is. There's a correlation there between the money coming in and so we have to move, and we have to move with the times. And the new stadium will be spectacular, right on the Mersey. It will be a place to go to visit if you're in the city. It will be a real on the list of tourist attractions. We'll get new fans coming in, new people bringing money into the club. So you have to go down that route. But I will miss Goodison. As I say, it's been a big part of my life, and it's one of the last old traditional grounds, isn't it? Where the wooden seats are still there. It shakes when the ball goes in, and I can still remember the sort of the smells and the sights when I first started going there as a wee lad. So it would be really sad when it's no more. But you have to move on. I think Manchester City have proved that when you do move on from your old ground, success can follow. We're a long way from winning the treble, but you can but dream, Carl.
You never know. You've covered a few there. Some of your fondest memories of Goodison, when you think about in those sights and smells, what are the matches that you will remember being there live in the ground for that will never leave you?
It's probably not even specific matches. It's going there. As I said, 87, I started going there with my dad. So I was only a 10-year-old boy, and it's all new to me. And I still remember, and I still have the feeling now, whenever you drive up to Goodison or you walk up, we used to park, for those who know the area, you've got the Anfield Cemetery, you've got obviously the park with the two football grounds either side of it. And we also used to park in the same place, me and my dad, and walk up. It's about probably a mile-long walk. It felt about 10 miles when I was a boy, and we used to walk up, and suddenly the ground just appears in front of you on the horizon. And I just remember the first time I ever saw that. And then when you're actually in the ground and you walk up the steps, and your head comes above it, and the pitch and the seats and the stadium appears in front of you, and the goosebumps, it still gets me now, just seeing that. As a football fan, as a 10-year-old, it felt like the biggest place in the world, and you go in now and it feels quite small as a football ground. But at the time, it was just so daunting and big and noisy. And I talk about the smells, the cigarette smell, and the hot dogs. I mean, it's all stereotypes, but, it was the way, in the late 80s. And I remember, I always remember, I was always in my tracksuit, my Everton tracksuit. My mum had made me a packed lunch, or I was clutching that as I walked into the ground. And I remember just George Harrison seemed to be playing on the PA system. I've got my mind set on you. Every single game, it was like, I don't think it was the one song they had and played every week, but whenever I was there, for that song now, if you ever hear it on the radio, if I ever hear it, it just takes me back straight away to going back to Goodison with my dad, as a young lad. And he and I over the years with work and stuff haven't been able to get there all that often, and his health isn't great now, so we haven't been to a game for a couple of years. But having those memories, particularly when that ground is no more, are really special.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what football's all about, isn't it? So, okay, the fifth and final match for you to choose is an international match you'd take with you to watch forever. Which game would you go for?
I mean, I could have gone for 66, couldn't I? Being an England fan. I've gone for an England game. I've gone for a game that I was at, which you might remember back in 2001. And I was actually working on it. I've not worked on many England games because I've been in, regional radio or national TV in the studio. But it was the England-Greece game, World Cup qualifier for 2002. And we were 2-1 down. And I was at Key 103 at the time. It was at Old Trafford in Manchester. So I was at the radio station there. Dan Walker was head of sport, and somehow we'd got commentary, quite a last-minute commentary deal because it was in Manchester. I don't know how it worked. So he was commentating, I was working alongside him. And of course, we were 2-1 down, a draw. We just needed to avoid defeat to qualify for the World Cup. If we lost, we'd have gone into a playoff and therefore might not have made it to Japan and Korea a year later. So it was all on the line. Got into stoppage time, 2-1 down, needed a goal. And we got that free kick, 25 yards out. David Beckham, who was captain, golden balls himself, took it 25 yards out, the whole ground. I just remember the tension, the nervousness. Everyone knew the significance. Everyone knew what Beckham was capable of, but, he could just as easily blaze it over the bar under such pressure. He had to score. Or there was every chance that England weren't going to qualify for the World Cup. And sure enough, he bent it over the wall, top left-hand corner, goal, and England qualified for the World Cup. And I just remember me and Dan were jumping up and down while he was trying to commentate, sort of bouncing around, arms around each other. And I was still quite new to the media. I was still aware while I was doing this. I shouldn't be doing this. It's unprofessional. And I remember I just turned around and I saw Alan Green, who was doing the 5 Live famous commentary, bouncing around with a pundit, whoever it was, I can't remember, maybe Terry Butcher or something, jumping around. I thought, it's fine. It was just an amazing occasion to be there for this England game, this huge moment. It was probably the moment of Beckham's career in a positive. And actually, in a way, it was, redemption for him from what happened in 1998 when he was, persona non grata and vilified for the sending off. And here he was, captain on his home ground or back in Manchester, and he scored the winning goal in the last minute of the game. So, yeah, that was amazing to be there.
Definitely that redemption, I think, of scoring that goal, and then of course that then set up. He scored the penalty against Argentina at that World Cup, didn't he?
Yeah, totally. How different it could have been if he'd not scored that free kick. So Bennett like Beckham, and he certainly did.
Yeah. You know, you're good at free kicks when it enters popular culture. That's
absolutely. Absolutely.
We've covered you in terms of most of your career, most of your day job is in live broadcast situations. Have there ever been any times when things are going terribly wrong and you have to just remain that serene swan at the top of the surface, even though things are going wrong around you?
Yes, I'd like to say, of course, that by watching me, you'd think that things never go wrong behind the scenes, because I'm just so smooth when chaos is going on behind me. But there are times when you can probably tell that I'm flowering around a bit because it's live TV. Stuff happens. In fact, we were talking before we came on air, weren't you and I, reminiscing about our days on the radio at Allen when, it was a very small team. You had me as presenter. We had someone driving the desk. We had you guys working on the studio, cutting stuff and sorting out the reporters who were at the grounds and all that. But it was a small team. I remember one day, did all the ISDNs, the way we feed the feed from the ground to the studio, all went down, I think. And I think there was no tech team in on a weekend. So I think I was out the back in an ad break maybe, or during when a song was playing, pulling out leads, switching on and off, resetting. I'll just pull it out the back and put it back in. That normally solves things. I think it did, but I think all the reporters had gone and it was chaos. So that happens in radio and in TV. But of course, in TV, it's a bigger operation and you've got lots of people involved. But I've had a few things. I remember once on a World Cup preview show being out of vision, and about 5 seconds before I was due to go on air, I went back to the desk and my chair had gone. As I went through this, literally, it was like 4, 3, and I saw a chair over there by a camera. So I had to literally run over because everyone was like, "What's Jules doing?" I ran over, grabbed this chair, dragged it across the studio, lifted it onto the stage, and won, and back in place just in time to do it. So no one would have known at home. So a bit of furniture removal whilst presenting. And then there was another time when, and this was probably one of the worst ones. I can't remember what happened. It was a technological failure, but I was speaking behind a graphics. There was a league table or something was up on the screen, and I was ad-libbing over it. And normally then the director would say, "Okay, back in vision," and you'll carry on with whatever. But they couldn't get the graphic off screen. So it was just stuck on screen. Now, occasionally you think, you'll hear them do something, and a couple of seconds later, you'll just let it pause, let it breathe a bit, and then they'll get rid of it, and then you'll carry on. But no, it was still there. And they said, Jules, you just have to keep going. So, of course, I said, and then just point out such and such team in 12th or whatever it was, and this team. Jules, that we can't get rid of it. So and it felt like about 5 minutes, but about a minute of me waffling onwards. I think I had to be honest. I think someone said to me many years ago, what you can't disguise, emphasize in TV. So, the viewer at home needs to know you can't try and pull the wool over their eyes. You just have to be honest and try and make light of it. So I think in the end I had to say, I'm going to be honest with you. This graphic is stuck and we can't get it down. So you just have to listen to me. And I can't remember the actual total in the end, but I think it was the best part of 4 minutes. Wow. That I was just my microphone and this stuck graphic, which has no relevance to anything I was talking about. But you just have to keep going until they've worked out what the problem is. Probably pull the plug out the back and put it back in. It was all right in the end.
I mean, people don't realise probably just how much noise is going on in your ears while you're talking away. And I remember that even in radio days of just being conscious of that, of trying to keep a message or a goal update brief, but, so that you get the message, but kind of on a different plane to the one that's talking and broadcasting. Is that something you're just developing over time, that you're just, I mean, are you good around the house at listening to 3 conversations going on at once, or is that just a skill you've developed?
A skill I've developed. What it means, I'm used to be able to pick out voices I need to pick out and ignore others. So I might say I'm very good at doing that at home. But it's something you build up over the years. Absolutely. I don't think anyone who works in TV for the first time can say when they first went into a studio and had a director and a producer and a director's assistant, and in my case on Soccer Specials, a stats guy, can have 4 different voices talking. No one can say, well, I was fine with it straight away. It takes time, and you learn to deal with all these different things going on, different people speaking to you at one time. And as you said, you used to buzz me at strategic times on the radio, and similarly, I have a lot of stats myself, but the stuff that's happening live, I can't be across everything. So I'll have a really good stats guy who works on the show who'll buzz me. I'll be talking about something else, or I'm about to go to something else, but he'll buzz me because he knows I've got time to process that, maybe write it down. But yeah, I mean, on those busy Tuesday nights on Soccer Specials, I could be, so I've got a video printer, which is changing all the time, which I've got my 20 sheets of paper, which I'm updating all the scores on all the time. So I'll be writing whilst I'm throwing to Clinton Morrison in the studio because he's just shouted, so something's happened in his game. Whilst I'm being told that we're about to go to a such and such a reporter at a ground to do this, then another goal goes on the video printer, and then I'm told, no, go to someone else instead because that's changed. Then a big goal goes in, so I'm trying to write. So, it's all the time. I mean, I come off air after a Tuesday night or Wednesday night after 3 hours on air, feeling absolutely done in, completely flattened. And my mates always joke, they say, you've been talking about football for 3 hours. We've been doing a proper job. How can you be shattered? But honestly, it's just this assault on your senses. And I'm absolutely, 3 hour show, I'm just absolutely done in by that because there's just so much going on. It's so intense. I mean, it's the thrill of it. Obviously, I love it. It's the joy. But that is why sometimes things do go wrong, or the brain and the head, brain and the mouth don't get in gear correctly. So because you've got so much going on, you'll say the wrong team or the wrong score, and people at home are going, why has he said that? But that's sometimes, probably what's happened, that there's something going on in my ear, and everything's not synced up at the right time. But hey, it's great fun. It's that spinning plates analogy I said again. But there's a lot going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, one hell of a skill. So on your deserted island, Jules, we're going to give you the chance of redemption. We're going to allow a either current or former Premier League player to come and attempt a rescue mission of you. However, do be warned, if this rescue mission fails, they are going to be stranded there with you potentially for all eternity. With that in mind, who are you going for?
Well, it's a guy, I've mentioned his name once before because I think he's my hero for the last 25 years. That's Duncan Ferguson, Big Duncan. Because favourite Everton player of the last 25 years. And if you want someone to come and rescue you on a mission who's got to come to adversity to get there and save you, this is a guy that fought off burglars in his house. Yeah. So he's gonna make sure he gets there to save you. He'd have some great stories about his Everton days, which I want to listen to. So if we are stuck for a bit, we'd be able to talk through the Everton days. And if all else fails and he can't rescue me and we get stuck there together, and you've got some low days and some tough times you've got to get through, the Everton ball boys will tell you from when he was manager, he gave a very good hug. And I think you might need a big hug from Big Dunc when times are tough, stuck on a desert island. So Duncan Ferguson's coming to save me.
All right, that's good. We'll send him along. And you've had some big characters on your panel for Soccer Specials over the years. One of the reasons I think the dynamic kind of banter and everything that goes on that show is why it's lasted so long. Are there any players that you kind of currently see in the current back to Premier League players who you think might make good pundits or panelists maybe 10 years from now after they've hung up their boots?
It's so interesting this because you never know whether a player is going to be comfortable doing punditry. Particularly on a show like Soccer Saturday, Soccer Special, and it's actually a lot more complicated than I think people give credit for. I mentioned what the sort of information I'm receiving in my ear. They're also receiving information from the director. They're listening to the commentary of their game. They're listening to me, throwing questions at them. They're trying to make sure they're across what's going on in the other games so they can interact if they need to. So it is actually quite a skill to be able to do it. And, some start doing it, go on, do one shift, maybe it doesn't go too well, and next thing they're being hammered on Twitter. Everyone thinks, well, you're a brilliant footballer, but you can't. You're terrible when it comes to describing a game. But why should we expect a player who was a brilliant footballer to be able to come and sit in the studio and give us good, insightful analysis? Doing something which they're not used to doing. They might have done post-match, interviews, of course, but it's a very, very different discipline. So you're never too sure whether a former player is going to make a good pundit for a show like that. And I've seen many a great player just racked with nerves, trying to deal with it. But you do look at players now and you think, I think they'd be good. And you often look for characters, because you want that on a show like that. It's calling the game is one thing, but you want someone who's going to bounce off the other three people in the studio. So I was thinking about this. I think Kyle Walker, he's got something about him. I think he'd be really good. James Maddison, I don't know about you, but whenever I see him being interviewed, he's always got something interesting to say, and plenty of it. He's not backward in coming forward, James. I think he'll definitely go, well, unless he wants to go into management when he finishes playing. I think he'll definitely be one of the media core. From the WSL, by the way, Mary Earps, she's a character. Yeah, and she'd be good value. I'd have to have an Everton player in there. So Dominic Calvert-Lewin speaks well. I think he'd do a good job. And my final one would be Jack Grealish, because he always speaks so honestly and openly. He's always got something interesting to say. A lot of players it's the nature of the beast, are sort of media trained to within an inch of their life these days, but he always comes up with something interesting. You can tell he speaks openly, speaks, from the heart, doesn't he? And also, you can also tell he likes a party, as we've seen the last 2 years with the celebrations. So, end of season or Christmas soccer Saturday soccer special party, I think he'd be very good value at those. So, get Grealish in the studio when he hangs up his boots.
Yeah, definitely. I think he'd be very, very good value. And like you say, there's not much filter there, is there? Which is refreshing.
No. Yeah, well, we don't have a dump button in live TV, obviously, so you have to be a little bit careful. But no, I think he'd be very good value.
Yeah, I do remember one or two of those making it onto air. If people swearing on Hallam FM, that was you have to be pretty quick on the button there, don't you?
I think we had a couple on the phone in, didn't we? The Ratum or Slatum phone-in we used to do. Used to have a few passionate fans getting irate and dropping the old word they shouldn't do. So, luckily you have that dump button. For people who don't know, it means that you're actually just a few seconds behind what you're hearing on the radio and you're able to press this dump button, which stops and then restarts the recording. So, it's a very clever way of making sure you're not going to get in trouble with Ofcom.
And I'm going to give you the opportunity to take a game with you, a Room 101 game, really. Is there a game that you can think of that you would want to delete from the history books? You've the chance to take it with you on the island. What would you go for?
Yeah, I don't think about this. It's not a game that had a particular impact in terms of the outcome of a season or anything like that, but it is an Everton game again. Sorry to always keep shoehorning my beloved Blues in. And it comes down to this, being on air as an Everton fan, but having to be professional. When I'm on Soccer Special, it's one of those shows where I play on it a little bit more with the pundits and stuff. But when I'm in Sky Sports News presenter mode, you're being more of an anchor and a newsreader a lot of the time. And so I try and sort of be a bit more straight down the line. And many years ago, I was on air updating the Merseyside derby back in 2016. And I was on air, me in the studio, alongside my good friend Vicky Gomersall, who was a big Liverpool fan. And the guest for the game, they'd booked a former Liverpool player and fan, Mickey Quinn. So I was sat there, outnumbered, on air, while the goals were raining in to our goal. We had Murray sent off as well in the second half. We lost 4-0, finished the game with 10 men. And I had Vicky and Mickey in my ear the whole night, but of course I was trying to be professional and just brush it off and just grin and bear it. And I remember I can still hear Mickey's voice when they scored their fourth, and he just looked at me and went, "It's 4 Jules!" So I can still hear him saying that. And I wish that night had never ever happened. We've had some painful defeats against Liverpool, but that one, being on air, surrounded by 2 Reds, was one I wish had never ever happened.
The combination of having to experience the banter from your mates when they're thrashing your team and having to do your job at the same time.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. Horrible.
Fair play. It's gone. We've got rid of it. And the final question, we're going to give you a football to take to your deserted island. You have potentially all eternity to recreate one Premier League goal. What would you go for?
Right, I've got two for you because one was an Everton goal as well. But I feel like I come up with something different this time. My Everton goal is Wayne Rooney. 16-year-old, the goal that announced him, burst onto the scene against Arsenal. First ever Premier League goal that he scored. And we all can picture the whip he put on the ball to get it over David Seaman in off the bar. So I'd like to practice that on the beach. But actually, I think people sometimes forget the ball that came over the top, the way he plucked it out of the air, he cushioned it, turned, and then whipped it over Seaman into the top corner. So, that would give me a bit of time to practice that, trying to cushion the ball and then whip it over the wall. But the goal that I would love to try and recreate while I'm on that desert island for the rest of my days is, do you remember Tony Yeboah? He scored a few crackers. But I'm going to say the one he scored for Leeds against Wimbledon in 1995. And the reason I've gone for this one is because I presume we're on the desert island at this point, are we? Yeah. Did you say? Yeah. So it's sandy, so it's hard to run with the ball, isn't it? But that goal he scored, the ball spent most of the time in the air. Don't you remember? Chest, thigh, couple of touches on the ground, and then bang, in off the bar. One of the best goals ever seen in the Premier League. And it hardly touched the floor, so it's nice and easy on the sand, isn't it? So yeah, that's the one I'd be practicing. Tony Yeboah, that absolute thunderbolt in '95.
I love how not only you picked the goal, you thought of the ergonomics behind it as well. That's absolutely fantastic. Jules, it's a pleasure speaking to you. Obviously, we will be seeing lots more of you on Sky Sports. What are your hopes for the new season? Are you, as we enter towards 23-24, kind of what are you? Do you think we're going to see another season where Manchester City are dominant?
It's going to be so interesting, isn't it? I mean, I know Arsenal were brilliant last season and just fell away at the end. But I say fell away. I mean, City were just relentless, weren't they, towards the end of the season, chasing the treble. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the others react. Chelsea, I think, will be better under Pochettino. Whether they'll be able to challenge, I don't think they'll be challenging for the title, but they'll be back up there. Newcastle will have Europe to contend with, but will need to strengthen them. Were brilliant last season. Arsenal, will they get Declan Rice as we speak? Them and City are going for him. Will they'll be able to be even better next season, having got so close. Liverpool will surely be better and will surely strengthen that midfield this summer. It's going to be so interesting to see what happens. I think as long as Pep's at Manchester City, I think the calibre of player they've got, and if they can keep signing players and adding those to the equation, even though they've lost Gundogan and will maybe sell on a couple of others, the financial might they have and the squad they've got, they can put out two 11s that would be in the top 2 or 3, can't they? Let's face it. So I think as long as that's the case, and as long as Guardiola is still there, I suspect their domination is going to carry on for a couple more years. But it is good. It was good to see last season, a new name on the block in Arsenal coming back and giving it a good go. So I expect City will win it again. But my hope is that maybe we have 3 or 4 teams in it really going for it this season. And my overwhelming hope is that Everton finish 11th. I'd love to finish 11th, Carl.
Man City top of the top half and Everton top of the bottom half.
There we are. We'll have that. Yeah, done.
Jules Warren, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for asking, Carl. Great to see you again. Cheers.
So that was Jules. What a top bloke. I worked with Jules back at Hallam FM way back in my university days. He really did give me and lots of other people a start, really. He was such a great mentor, a really, really generous guy. It's fantastic to see how well his career has gone, and it just goes from strength to strength. And one of my earlier episodes, actually, with Joe Rawson, someone I only saw the other night, as it happens, came to a gig of mine. Joe Rawson was also kind of under the mentorship of Jules and is now at Sky Sports himself as well. So if you enjoyed today's episode, if getting into sports journalism is one of the reasons perhaps you are listening or watching today, Joe Rawson's episode is also really, really useful. I'd recommend going back and finding that one. Next week's show is a former Premier League star, one of the most recognisable faces of the 90s, actually, as it happens, albeit perhaps unintentionally. Jason Lee, he talks about his rise up through the ranks, up the Football League ladder. He hits form in the Premier League, which draws him to the attention of Badil and Skinner and fantasy football, and kind of the infamous sketch. And he talks about that in a great deal of detail, the impact that had on his life and his entire career. Still to this day, nearly 30 years on, it's still something that comes up, and where that's taken him in his career. It's a really interesting chat. He's such an articulate guy, really considered in and generous in his kind of review of the things that happened to him, which really were very, very difficult at a time when supporting football wasn't anywhere near to the level it is now. That is coming next week. I hope you'll hang around. In the meantime, please leave the show a review. Have a look in the description. You can find all the social media links there, and also how you can support the show on buymeacoffee.com if you wish to contribute. Thank you so much for listening or watching today. It is great to be back. I will be back next week for my in-depth chat with former Nottingham Forest striker Jason Lee. Until then, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. See you next week.